Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to another HRO Today educational podcast. I'm Elliot Clark, the CEO of HRO Today. We publish HRO Today Magazine, HRO Today EMEA, HRO Today APAC, producers of the HRO Today forums and events held around the world, and the managers of the HRO Today Association. Today, we're going to speak more to the provider community, but I think it makes a lot of sense for the HR and procurement community to listen and learn how the business of your recruitment and staffing partners work. The human supply chain of contingent talent relies upon solvent businesses, and the price points require that they operate at low margins to keep prices affordable for you, the clients. In this low margin business model, there's also a lag in paying employees and receiving reimbursements on invoices for large scale MSP and contingent providers. As a result, cash flow is a challenge that requires careful planning, and the best HR teams have the best partners, and the best providers also need great partners. In this case, a cash flow partner that can factor contingent labor invoices and improve profitability and services supports not only the providers, but actually the buy side practitioners. We're joined today by First Commercial Credit. They are an independently owned financial company that provides fast and flexible accounts receivable financing for service-based businesses. They're an ideal guest to talk about this issue. First Commercial Credit provides accounts receivable financing for service-based companies, including staffing agencies, security guards, and a wide range of service industries. First Commercial Credit's been in existence for more than 20 years. They have a AAA rating from the Better Business Bureau. They have experience to be a great partner in the contingent labor sector. Their CEO and founder, Raul Esqueda, is here to explain the stresses of managing payroll as a contingent labor service provider and how factoring invoices is a solution that can support cash flow and profitability. Raul, welcome to the podcast. And would you like to add anything about First Commercial Credit for our audience?
Yes, Elliot, thank you for having me today. And as you mentioned earlier, we specialize in financing accounts receivable and specifically for business-to-business transactions that have to invoice net 30, 60, 90, and believe it or not, we're seeing up to 120-day terms. And what's a little bit different than what we normally run into, most clients do not realize that their invoice, once it's approved for payment, it becomes a receivable asset on their business. And what we do is we simply just convert that invoice asset into a cash asset. There's no loans, there's no payments to be made. We basically just collect our fee once we collect the payment. So what this does is, and amazingly, a lot of businesses do not know about this type of service, right? Because the first thing they do is they go to the bank and try to get a term loan. And what we found is that the biggest mistake a client makes in this type of business model is as you grow your business, a term loan is never going to be enough. And the beauty of this type of financing is as your business grows and as your business invoices, there's really no limit because we're leveraging everything on the creditworthiness of the customer they're selling to. So, for example, we could set up a staffing agency today, brand new, just, one day in business, they got their first contract, we could give them a $500,000 line of credit to work with. And, they could go in and put on a new client every week. There's really no limit. There's no cap compared to, term loans and bank lines. And that's what I think is becoming very popular. That's why invoice financing is becoming very popular.
Well, let's talk about some of the challenges in this particularly contingent labor service market. So how does the current model of contingent labor cause the cash flow pressure on the providers? And how do the low margins of some of the deals make options available to providers difficult or even destructive to the profitability and viability of continuing service? Basically they're having to pay the payroll, every 2 weeks or 30 days. And yet they may not be collecting, as you said earlier, an invoice for 90 days. So tell me what the pressures are in that model and how you help fix it.
Sure. Well, there's several segments in that question. First of all, what causes the cash flow crunch, right? And any service-based business, whether it's a staffing agency, a security guard company, IT, they do a great job placing positions and billing hours, right? The challenge comes from offering the credit terms in order to get the business, because if you can't offer credit terms, you're not going to get the business. And, by the way, I want to mention entrepreneurs hold back from opening up a new business because they know that there's just no way they're going to be able to hold out, if they're going to offer credit terms. And so I'm here today to let them know that we take entrepreneurs every day. We fund entrepreneurs every day because we can help with that cash flow crunch by providing financing every week as they're invoicing for their billed hours from the previous week work. Most businesses, they on average have to wait anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks before that first check arrives. So in the meantime, they still have to meet weekly payroll, rent, insurance, their clerical staff, sometimes even marketing expenses, subscription expenses. And all that creates the cash flow pressure long before the revenue actually comes in. And what's sad is you can look at their profit and margin on paper. Everything looks good except the cash on the balance sheet. There's just no cash. It looks like they're making money, but they don't have any money. So that's how we can help with the cash flow issue. As far as the profit, that's a whole different element because there are so many variables. I evaluate so many businesses struggling with profitability. And what I found is that they forget to consider a lot of the stuff that goes on in the back end that they forget. And one of them is the unexpected workers' compensation. I've seen so many times where they have a certain category of staff out in the field and the customer requests a different position that doesn't cover that workers' comp category. And then next thing they know, they place that position and they get hit with an increase in their workers' comp because they didn't have that category. And so that's an unexpected cost that comes and surprises them. The other is paid holidays. A lot of our clients forget to mention that in their contract. And a paid holiday, one day out of the week, that's 20%. So now you have a cost with 20% less revenue for that week. So you gotta build it into your pricing structure. And and the other stuff like employer's tax. Some states, they have to hire union labor and there's benefits in there that they weren't aware of. There's a lot of contracts that don't allow overtime to be billed, but they're still having to cover their employees with overtime cost. And all of these items at the end of the month or end of the year can make or break a business. You could either be upside down or you could be profitable. And the other thing to consider is offering credit terms costs money, regardless if you have a line of credit at the bank or you're financing receivables through a factoring company, you have to build in financing credit terms into the pricing structure. One of the most successful clients that we have figured out how to make more money by going after more specialized niche segments of the market. And I've noticed labor that requires some type of a certification. For example, I have a client that has certified welders. They're very hard to find. And he's getting premium dollar for that. But guess what? It's net 60-day terms coming in at 75 days. And there's companies that need to understand that not everybody pays in 30 days or not everybody pays in 15 days. So you have to have a financial partner that can withstand and help you and be right behind you on clients that are very profitable, but you're going to have to hold 60 to 75 days to get paid.
At least with contingent staffing, your example with certified welders is an example where it might be a bit higher margin for that class of labor, but in some of the standard ones, it's relatively low margin. In the prep for this, Raul, you and I talked about the company Chimes, which was a servicing factoring company for contingent labor, actually collapsed. And at the time that Chimes collapsed, there were hundreds of millions of dollars of cash in exchange. So I would think that, if you were looking at a partner, these issues that you just outlined, and, we see some providers making bad short-term choices. And I've heard of examples where contingent labor providers have essentially gone out of business. One of them involved a healthcare system that was relying on them for nursing talent, and the company just collapsed because they were getting paid slow, in 90 days, and they were having to front-end payroll. So given all these issues and some of the bad short-term choices that company made as an example, it really erodes and destroys profitability. So how does partnering with your service firm that does the factoring drive the profitability and the cash flows we just discussed, but also shouldn't the buyers evaluating these contingent labor firms ensure in their RFP or some other kind of due diligence that they have a partner that can step in and help them when there's a problem? That is also a complex question with lots of different aspects. I do that a lot, Raul. I'm just warning you.
Yeah, so we've been doing this now for 20 years. One of my first clients was actually a staffing agency. One thing that in the old days, the reason I mention that is when I remember in the old days, there was a perception that our clients came to us and they were so nervous and anxious that they didn't want their client to know that they were financing their receivables. They thought it was a really bad thing. They'd say, "Oh my gosh, they're going to say that I'm having financial trouble." I said, "What do you mean? I'm giving you a half a million dollar line of credit." Well, how's that making you look bad? And if anything, your client's now going to realize that they're going to have a provider that has liquidity in order to be able to make payroll and they're not going to have issues versus some other staffing agency that doesn't have any financing in place. So I think that's a plus. I think if you're a small business looking to grow your company, you can now go and compete with the larger staffing agencies that are offering net 60-day terms. Now you're equal to them in financing potential. In fact, you might even want to let the client know, look, if you want to do net 75, I can do net 75. I don't have a problem with that. I have the financing in place. You do need to make sure that you have the profitability built in. But that was the next thing I was going to is, you have to make sure, regardless if you're financing receivables or not, you have to be profitable. You have to make your pricing structure to where you're always retaining earnings. You got to retain earnings, and if you're working on a markup model, you need to make sure that you know what your total cost is for operating your business and then your actual job cost. And then, I would still increase it another 10% over and above that just to retain earnings for growth and any other thing that comes along. But as far as having a financial partner, I think is key. How can you possibly go out and grow your business without any financing in place? And, like I said earlier, the number one mistake a lot of companies make is they get either a short-term loan or go to the bank and put their house up as equity. And so what? You got a $200,000 loan? You're going to blow right through that after your first or second client. And what are you going to do when your client says, "Hey, I love your service. Send me 10 more people"? Then what are you going to do? And so the beauty of receivable finance is it grows proportionally with your sales. We have staffing agencies, for example, that start with 30,000 a month and they're doing 1 million a month now without any cash flow issues, without any debt. So anyway, that's why we're here today to be able to transfer this information over to your constituents to make sure that they understand that there's more financing options out there than just a bank line.
And you do raise an interesting point, and we're almost out of time, but a small to mid-sized player who might be local, who might be known in the community, who's someone who you might not use because you want a big brand name or you want a national brand because you want that financial stability. That firm with the software that's now available to everyone, the VMS software, and a partner such as First Commercial Credit can actually compete for those larger programs because they'll have the solvency and the capability to match the service of a larger player. I don't know if they really think about that aspect of supporting their story. It's not something to hide, it's something to actually sell.
Yes, and in fact, we just onboarded a small staffing agency, women-owned. They're in Georgia. There's a municipality that just awarded $5 million to small business. They were trying to get a loan at the bank for, offering the credit terms that they needed. It was a staffing agency with IT type of services, and I gave them a $2 million line. I mean, I did it in 1 week. So this is what's available. Everything is based on the buyer side, right? The financial strength of the payor. We're really not looking at the financial ability for our client to pay us back anything. We're not getting paid by our client. We're getting paid by the customer that's getting serviced. And then, one other thing too is we wanted to mention is I get a lot of questions of what should I calculate as far as, financing with receivable financing in place and I'd say regardless if there's a bank that you have or you're going to do receivable finance, I would calculate in your pricing structure to add 1% every 15 days to more or less offset your cost of financing. So if you, for example, have a net 30-day term client, those payments are going to probably come in at 40 days, 45 days. So I would calculate at least 3% for a net 30-day term client, just so you could offset some of the cost.
Well, that's good advice for the organizations that would ultimately partner with you. We're sort of out of time, but I'd like to continue this conversation in the future, Raul. This was interesting, going behind the scenes of how these deals actually are structured, how they work, the considerations for the provider community that's listening to us. Obviously having this kind of financial partner can be of great benefit. For the practitioner audience, it's a question you should be asking in your RFP. How are you financing your cash flow? Do you have a partner that will support you in times when your cash flow might be, more challenging? If you don't know the answer to that question, you're exposed. Most RFPs ask for financial details, but they're dated. They're sometime in the past. Those balance sheets, by the time you contract with them, have, probably 6 months old. Knowing that there's a partner like First Commercial Credit or another is a valuable piece of information you need to know as a customer, and the providers need to be able to put forth as an option. Raul, thank you so much for taking part in the podcast. As I said earlier, First Commercial Credit is a 20-year-old independently owned financial service company, and you're AAA rated by the Better Business Bureau, and I believe our audience will also give you a AAA rating, Raul.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you for taking part. This is Elliot Clark, CEO of HRO Today. I want to thank you for your time and attention, and we'll welcome you to join us on our next HRO Today podcast.